Listen up, fellow Democrats. Fight fake news and lies with facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. Keep our integrity, embrace our diversity. Whenever we're down, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
Hello, welcome to Progressive Oregon, a weekly engagement broadcast on progressive issues in Oregon. My name is Larry Taylor, and I'm here today with my co-host, Betsy Cunningham. If you would like to ask questions during the show, go to the Uphill Media channel in YouTube and type your questions into the chat window. Betsy will relay them back to us, and we will do our best to answer them. On our show today, we're going to go through a brief update on what's been happening recently. Then we are going to talk about the Van Scandal, with the voter file of the Democratic Party of Oregon. Then we're going to have our guest today, Patrick Starnes, who's going to be talking about the continuing effort to get campaign finance reform here in Oregon. We'll do a brief update on the national popular vote legislation, which is now up for its sixth time at bat in the Oregon legislature, and then go through upcoming events. So to get started, what's been happening, and this is the good news for the 56% of the Oregonians who voted for progressive change in 2016. I have revived the Progressive Caucus, and unlike the previous incarnation, which is similar to the way the Democratic Party does caucuses where anyone can join in, this Progressive Caucus functions like the Congressional Progressive Caucus. So anyone who is on the progressive side of the spectrum who wants to work together, who is an elected delegate or alternate delegate to the State Central Committee of the Democratic Party of Oregon, is welcome to join. And what we will do is make sure that you're informed on upcoming resolutions and other issues that will be facing the party so that we can work together to get things done. I'm not that much of a conspiracy theorist, but I think the inability for us to communicate across the state and work together is intentional, because if we are divided, then we can't work together and combine our efforts. So I urge anyone who would like to join in, working together to make the changes to the Democratic Party so it's a party we can be proud of. Please go to pdpo.org, and that stands for the Progressive Caucus of the Democratic Party of Oregon. You can also email me at lawrence.d@gmail.com. Also, in retooling for 2020, we have Advancement of Democracy. This is for all the people who are not delegates to the State Central Committee, but who would like to see changes in the Democratic Party. You can sign up at advancementofdemocracy.org. We would love to have you get involved. In addition to working on various issues, you can also help us search for candidates. We've identified 6 positions that we want to find candidates to run in the legislature in 2020, and we would appreciate your support in doing that. And we would, if there's other things you would like to do working together, please let us know and we will make it happen. And then the third thing that's happening is that Justice Oregon will be meeting at the beginning of March. This is a coalition of groups across Oregon who will work on the big issues like ballot initiatives and statewide elections and possibly local elections if they're important enough. We'll be meeting on March 2nd. If you are a member of one of the organizations and you would like to be represented or would like to represent that organization in the group, again, contact me at lawrence.d.taylor.com and we will get you involved in the group. Now, going to our first big topic, we entitled it Van Scandal, but I was thinking about this as I was driving yesterday, and we went to the press a couple of last year during the primary on what we thought was a juicy story similar to this, and they just looked at us and they ultimately said that's not news because like the Trump administration, the scandals are just so common anymore that they just don't catch anyone's interest. So at least for the Boy Scouts amongst us who still believe in democracy, this should resonate with you. So just to go back to where the party is formed in Oregon statute, and what the Oregon statute says. It says in ORS 248.005, which is at the very beginning of the statute. This is where it lays out the framework for the political parties. It says each political party by rule shall ensure the widest and fairest representation of party members in the party organization and activities. Rules shall be adopted that assure the fair and open participation of all interested party members. So presumably we could take this scandal to Republican Dennis Richardson, and he would prosecute our party members for being criminals in my fantasy world. So that's what it says in state statute. So in the Democratic Party of Oregon bylaws, which is where the next level down from Oregon statute, it says that the state central committee is the governing body of the party and may delegate its authority, which, like any democratic institution, this is the center, and when they want other entities to do things, they delegate that authority out to them to make things more efficient. Otherwise, all power starts with and belongs to the state central committee. Then what they've done then to delegate that power is that there's basically three groups of people. There's the executive committee, and we'll get into some slides which talks about what that is, but that's really it's actually a very large group of people, but they're chartered with doing business in between state central committee meetings. The state central committee meets 4 times a year, roughly once every. That does make sense to delegate the authority to do things in the interim to group, and that would be the executive committee. Then there's this other entity called the administration committee, which will also talk about the language that charters it, and it's about human resource and fair and treatment of the DPO staff. And then we have this third group of people, which are the congressional district committees, and we're not going to talk about them very much, but they've been chartered with electing the standing committee members of the standing committees to the state central committee. So the next slide is what the Oregon statute says. It says the DPO. I'm sorry. This is what article. I don't think it is, so I guess it's the poor infrastructure here in it's heavily raining, so maybe that's it. So in Article 2, which also is at the very top of the bylaws, it says the DPO is empowered by law and the Democratic National Party Charter to manage the affairs and transact its business. The state central committee is the governing body of the party, and it may delegate its authority. So the next slide talks about what the executive committee is, and the very item, it says it acts for the state central committee when time does not permit properly calling a meeting of the state central committee. All such actions should be reported to the state central committee at its next meeting. So clearly, the executive committee is the intended body for doing anything in between the state central committee meetings, and then they need to report anything that they've done to the state central committee pretty much for ratification. Then there's a bunch of other stuff that they are chartered with, but that's the executive committee. So in reality, the executive committee has been rarely called, and I don't think I've been on any role that would entitle me to attend, but it's my understanding that they're not even meetings. They're basically FYI communications, but no business is actually transacted. And I would suspect that the last business that was transacted was the election of the treasurer 2 years ago. So the next one is the administration committee and how that's defined. And this is the one that's very interesting. You can see starting out at the very first one, it serves as the personnel committee of the DPO and under the guidance of the chair supervises the executive director. Second one, under the recommendation of the chair and with the approval of the executive committee, employees and releases all paid personnel. So again, B is all about employees. And then it talks a little bit about budgeting and revenue. And then when you finally get to the fifth point, it says develops and implements policies related to the role of officers, staff, committees, and caucuses in executing the work of the DPO. the chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon cited this fifth line under the administration committee as the empowerment of the administration committee to do all the business of the Democratic Party of Oregon. So things like this van access policy was written by them. When I first read this initially, I thought that this was around policies, HR policies related to the role of officers, staff, and committees. But it has now been stretched to cover everything within the Democratic Party of Oregon. And unlike the language under the executive committee, there is no process here to bring things back to the State Central Committee for ratification. So who is the admin committee? So there's 8 people. It's the Democratic Party of Oregon chair, the 2 elected vice chairs, the treasurer, which was appointed by the executive committee, the Democratic Party of Oregon secretary, which is an elected position, and the 3 DNC members, which we elect for 4 years, and we'll be electing them again in 2 years. It meets twice a month, and it rarely addresses personnel issues. And when I was on the admin committee from 2014 to 2016, there was once when we discussed a personnel issue, and the rest of the time it was party business. And it was the admin committee that validated the van voter file usage policy that is in place now. So now to give you some background on the van file and how we discovered that this was even an issue. Back in December of 2013, Barbara Smith Warner was appointed to House District 45, replacing Michael Dembrow, who had moved over to the Senate. This goes through the process of the PCPs nominating 3 to 5 candidates, and then the county commissioners selecting the final candidate. So it's not a candidate that was elected by the people. They were basically appointed by the county commissioners. Then in 2014, this happens in December, right? The long session has already happened. The short session has already happened. Barbara Smith Warner basically had not done any functioning activities of being a legislator. But in 2014, the position was up for election again. And so she had to be elected to House District 45. In addition, Tom Sinsick, who is currently the president of Healthcare for All Oregon, filed to run for House District 45, and he requested access to the van file, and he was denied access because Barbara Smith Warner was the incumbent. So we discussed this inside the admin committee, and the first thing that came up was I asked where this policy was written down, and no one knew where it was written down. And so we made the point of, well, if it's not written down, how could it be a policy? And so he said, don't worry, we'll research this and come back. And so at the next meeting, it was reported that people had been carrying around different versions of this policy in their head. And so there were actually different implementations of this unwritten policy, and that they would write it down. And so that was the first time we'd seen this actually in language, so we could look at the language and then debate on whether it was appropriate or not. Tom appealed the decision that he was denied, and his appeal was not successful, and Smith Warner had been was reelected to her position. So in 2016, the DPO Rules Committee began crafting a process for handling these types of undocumented processes, and it's a struggle that is still continuing. We've had DNC members argue on behalf of the chair, presumably about why this is too onerous, but really what we want to do is have for the admin committee decisions, the same thing that is articulated in the bylaws for the executive committee, that these kinds of things be run by the State Central Committee. And then in 2018, they published a full-page definition of the voter file access, and that's where they continue to deny access to all the Democrats who want to run for the legislative positions challenging an incumbent. So that brings us to last year, where we had a very unusual case where Senator Rod Monroe had cast some very unpopular votes and there was a number of Democrats in the legislature who really wanted him replaced. And so two candidates ended up filing to run against Rod Monroe. One was Casey Jama, who was a longtime activist in Portland, great guy, but was not the anointed candidate by the establishment. The anointed candidate was Shemia Fagan. But we were told back then that both Shemia and Casey had been denied access to the Van voter file because they were challenging an incumbent. So presumably Rod Monroe was able to access the Van and run his campaign, even though he eventually lost. Now we're being told, and this is news that I got just last week, that even though Casey had been denied access, Shemia had been granted access to the Van voter file for some process that we're unaware of. I asked the question of some members of the admin committee, like, was this a decision made in the admin committee? No one has responded to me because they probably thought I would go on air and talk about it, which of course I would. So there's two instances. There's probably two cases for this. One is that they knew that they had approved access to Shemia for the Van voter file so she could use it. Or the second case is that they were unaware of her getting access because there's actually dozens of groups that have access to the Van, and everyone except candidates challenging incumbents seem to be able to get access to it. But if it's a case where access was being granted illegally and their controls are so poor that they can't control it, then that just speaks to gross incompetence. So that's the scandal. They can't even follow their own policy for administering this data. And so we're going to continue the fight. So going to the slide on what's being done, Clackamas County Democrats, which is now becoming one of the most active leaders in the state, have crafted a resolution to put the question of equal and fair treatment to the governing party of the Democratic Party of Oregon, the State Central Committee, and hopefully we will see that resolution at the May 17th meeting. And what we are doing is we're asking all 36 counties to endorse this resolution and encourage their delegates, because they're the people who elect the delegates to the State Central Committee, to support this and get this straightened out so that this embarrassing policy is finally addressed. If you would like to read the resolution, it's posted at advancementofdemocracy.org. And if your leadership has not brought this before the committee, you're more than welcome to, if you are a member of one of the county organizations, and by member by being either a elected or an appointed precinct committee person, any of you can bring this resolution before your county central committee for passage. And we would appreciate it if everyone would do that. And if you do that, please send me your updates to lawrence.d.taylor@gmail.com because we're tracking the progress across the state. Is there any questions on this, Betsy?
Barbara Bartleson said ban equals voter access. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more about what that means.
Thank you for asking. I always work in my own bubble. I forget that everyone doesn't carry around all the knowledge that I do. So long before Obama ran for office, the Democratic Party started developing a voter database to help candidates run for office. And it got a huge boost in 2008. If you remember when Barack Obama first ran, they had the huge database that they developed covering all 50 states. And it was one of the key contributors to his election. It was also used again in 2012. That technology that he developed has been allegedly integrated into the VAN, which is the Voter Access Network. And the Democratic Party has various processes for allocating access to that. If you are running for a local election, you can go to your county chair and say, hey, I'm running for county commissioner or whatever position you're running for, and they can give you access to this. And the reason why it's valuable is that in addition to the straight voter file data that you can get from the Secretary of State, it has augmented data to it, which includes phone numbers that we've paid third parties to augment the data with. There's also voter profile data. So if you subscribe to, I don't know how they collect it, but somehow they go out and they find information about your political leanings, and even though they might be non-affiliated voters, if they have data on them, they'll help you identify the progressive ones, so you don't have to just bank on Democrats running for you if you're a Democrat. And so there are times where the van data can be very helpful to a campaign. It allows you to print out maps and select people that you're targeting, because we know that the most effective way to run a campaign is to go and knock on doors and actually meet people. So it can be a very useful tool. The candidate who beat Representative Weil in Clackamas County, unfortunately I forget her name, but that is how she won. She started from behind. She was in a position where she could just devote her life to running for office, and she went out and knocked on 40,000 doors, and she beat an incumbent and captured one of the additional seats for the Democrats.
And I'm going to say, just having run local campaigns, that I've encouraged people to become Democrats just to have access to the van, because it really is critical because of the information and access to the voter information that it provides a candidate, particularly a candidate on a low budget. You can buy the voter registration records, but if you're, a low budget candidate, say in a city council in Roseburg, then you might not have the money to do that even. So it's actually a very valuable resource. So Aileen K asked, so what is the wrongdoing? She asked this before you kind of pointed out some of the things, but maybe you can just, clarify, the bottom line.
So there's two. The first one is they violate the state law that we cited initially, that we're not treating all Democrats running for public office fairly and equally. And then the second one is that we have this policy where the policy says that they could be treated unequally, but then the Democratic Party of Oregon, somebody violated even that and gave access to someone challenging an incumbent. So they're not even following their own policy.
Oslafave asked, what is the acronym ORS?
Oregon Revised Statutes, I believe. That's what it is. It's Oregon law.
Yeah, you're right. It's Oregon Revised Statute. And those were the only questions, I think, so far.
Well, I wanted to jump in, sorry, that's really loud, with a statement from Kevin Cronin here, because we talked about this before, Larry, about the other options and what their advantages and disadvantages are from Van. And this is Kevin saying, Van isn't the only tool. Nation Builder and Aristotle are similar projects. One can also buy a voter file from the county for like $35. All right, so if money isn't an issue, you still have the problem of understanding the technology here. You've looked at these, at both of these, right?
Yes, and they are options. It's just not the last thing you want to do. I mean, running for office is actually a very complicated process, and so it's really great having this out-of-the-box solution for you to use. There are other things you can do, but you really need someone who's technologically savvy to help you do that, or at least someone to volunteer and deal with it, and learn the application, get the data, load it up, cut the turf, all that stuff. So there are other options, and just because you don't get access to the van, I would urge you not to let that be a detriment to your candidacy.
Larry, can I add what I understand about the van?
Yeah.
That makes it different than other models is every 2 years when people go door to door, that data, that information that volunteers gather is added to the van. So you have really good information about different neighborhoods, who's progressive, who's conservative, even with independents and NABs. So that's why the van stands above a lot of other models, because it's accumulated, years and years of data from neighborhoods. Of course, when people move, that changes and that has to be updated.
Yeah, Patrick, I want to just say, from having used the van and being a neighborhood leader, that the data in there is so inaccurate. so horribly inaccurate. And honestly, for a candidate, the only thing they need is addresses so they can block it off and know how to knock doors. What that person says on the other end of the door or thinks based on the van is kind of irrelevant when you're just knocking doors. That's the way I view it. It was just nothing in my database was accurate except for that person might live there. Seriously.
That's sad. Yeah, I when I go door to door, being an independent, I'm after everyone. So I'm not trying to target a certain demographic. I want to meet every single person on that street, every person in the neighborhood, conservative, liberal, whatever, because that's we're trying to reach everyone.
Absolutely.
I just want to say, having run campaigns as a campaign manager, that as it gets closer to the election day, I actually do use that data from the van to target who's going to be followed up on. So if they're more progressive and there's that data that reflects that, those are going to be the people that I'm going to say first target these folks to get out the vote.
All right.
Yeah, especially when you have that information about who hasn't voted in those last, the ballots have been out for weeks. You're down to the last group of people that have not voted yet. You're really trying to narrow that down.
It is definitely helpful if you know how to use it. So and if anyone needs to know why this unfairness is not good for democracy, we've talked on this show multiple times about how the primary in 2018 was so boring for most of the Democrats in the state because there was only one candidate listed on their ballot to run, and they were the incumbent. There's very, very few people who run against incumbents. The Shamia Fagan, Casey Jama case was a definite outlier. There was one or two cases where the incumbent didn't run again, like in my district, and so we had an open race. But then in that case, everyone had access to the van. But it gives. I mean, when we have great incumbents that represent the people, then it's not a big deal. But there are a few senators who don't vote like Democrats, and it's questionable if they even share values with Democrats, but they want to be a Democrat because that's what they need to be to win in their district. And so we get the people who don't vote, and it's not that everyone has to vote as a block when they get to the legislature, but there is some assumptions that there's some common values that cause them to vote together and work together. And that's how we get progressive legislation passed, like campaign finance reform and fair, no cause evictions stopped, and national popular vote. I mean, if we had progressive candidates who would support those issues and get them passed, then we would be in a different place today. So we've had Patrick chime in. So now we're going to do a formal introduction as we go to the next segment of the show. We have joining us today Patrick Starnes, who was the independent candidate for governor last year, and then joined in to help us elect Governor Brown, so we wouldn't have Newt Bueller as our second statewide elected Republican. Welcome, Patrick. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Larry. I appreciate coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so just why don't you tell us a story about what happened during the election, what you did to help Governor Brown, what agreements you made, and then what you've been doing since then.
Well, I got into the election at the very last day in March. It was the last day to file, and there were two other independent opponents in my primary in May. They didn't get anything in their voters pamphlet, so I was the front runner in that regard. But we almost lost the independent primary because of the write-ins. Both Bueller and Brown spent probably $250,000 trying to get the write-in vote in that primary, but we prevailed with our message of getting big money out of politics. So then we went into the November election, and it was October 30th that I met with Governor Brown to get her commitment to push forward a constitutional amendment. Because as you know, we have lots of campaign finance reform issues have passed, but then they get thrown out of court because of the Constitution. So she promised to in this next session, which is the session we're in now, to guarantee that we would get a referral from Salem to get it to the voters to amend the Constitution so we can have limits on donations to candidates. And I've been working once a week. I go to Salem, meeting the state senators, state reps to hear their feedback on how they feel about campaign finance reform. I've only had one senator, a Democrat from up in Hillsborough, that didn't even care about it at all. So that was a shocker. But otherwise, it's been across both aisles. Support for getting big money out of politics has been bipartisan.
How is the bill going to be written?
Well, right now there are two different resolutions, one from the House and one from the Senate. And if your listeners want to read the Statesman Journal article this morning, Sunday's paper, it gives some really good details about the difference of the two initiatives. There's a young rep from Corvallis who has pushed forward a amendment referral on the second article of the Constitution, Section 8, which is the mechanics of elections. And then Floyd Przansky from Salem, the senator from Eugene, he's pushed forward an initiative he had 2 years ago to amend Article 1 of the Constitution, Section 8, which is the free speech clause. So it's sort of wonky to get into the details, and we don't have that resolved which one is going to move forward between the two. I think the governor leans more to the Article 2 amendment because a lot of those proponents of that are trying to avoid a fight with like the ACLU and other free speech advocates. But Floyd Przansky would argue that if you do that, you could pass the initiative to amend Article 2, but it could still get thrown out because it could be determined to violate the free speech clause. So he would rather amend the free speech clause straight away and get over that hurdle rather than have a successful measure pass and then it gets thrown out again. So
the process is the resolution then has to be passed by one of the houses and then the other house, and then it goes to the governor for the signature, and then it becomes a ballot initiative that we would vote on?
Yeah, to amend the Constitution, the state reps and state senators have to refer that to the voters. So we would have a chance in 2020 to vote to amend that Constitution. So they have the party, the folks in Salem have to iron out which one is going to be referred to the voters. And that's the current battle, is sorting that out. What's exciting about this session is, well, in that last election was Jeff Golden, the new senator from Ashland. He ran like I did with no PAC money, no corporate money. And not only did he beat his corporate Democratic challenger in his primary down in Ashland, but he also beat the Republican challenger with those limits on his donations. So he has been appointed to the new committee on campaign finance reform in the Senate. So he's the chair of this new committee that Peter Courtney created. And what I've been doing on the House side is pressuring the Speaker to create a similar committee on the House side, because the worst thing that can happen with any of these initiatives are that they could die in the Rules Committee. That's a classic place where things go to die, because there are no deadlines in the Rules Committee. So things can languish, and there's a whole slate of issues that come to the Rules Committee, and these things can die in these certain committees, and we don't want that. So that's why we want these specific committees, both on the Senate side and the House side, that are specifically for campaign finance reform.
Who's the chair of the Rules Committee on the House?
It's Paul Hovey. He's in Floyd Przansky's Senate district. He's the House member from Eugene.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
If they
right now,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Meeting all those different House members this coming Wednesday, and we met with the Hovey staff, and we're trying to make, if the Speaker does not create this new committee, we want to push the House Rules Committee to have this be in the top front burner in the high priority in their committee, so it's not pushed to the back. You know,
if it gets out of committee and goes to the floor, does it take a majority to refer it, or 2/3?
To refer it? No, it's just a simple majority to put it on the ballot for us to vote on.
Wow, with the super majorities with the Democrats, then it should be a no-brainer.
Well, you would think, but you know, the party leadership, like you were just talking about, they don't necessarily want certain changes, and we're going to see could be the real battle is not the members of the House or the Senate, because I've met with a lot of them, and they're tired of dialing for dollars. So I think they're on board with us. But if the leadership of the party doesn't want this to happen because they just want a supermajority with no campaign limits, that's the real challenge in Oregon. It's not just getting all these reps to support it, but to get it through these committees and get it to the floor and then refer it to the voters.
I want to jump in here first to say thank you, Density McCartney, for your $20 donation. Really appreciate that. Keeps
Great.
the lights going. But also, Patrick, I'm listening to you talk here, and I'm concerned because you're talking about Peter Courtney forming a committee, and then I believe you said the Rules Committee in Senate is one of the problems. Isn't that Ginny Burdick? I want to make sure I've got the right person in there, but who?
Yeah, Ginny Burdick is the chair of the Rules Committee in the Senate.
Okay.
But what I was talking about is the Rules Committee in the House.
Right.
Since
but can't that stuff get all
its own-
stuck in the Senate Rules Committee as well? I mean, that's what we've seen historically, is Peter Courtney stops all progressive legislation with the help of Ginny Burdick.
Right. It's called Ginny's Graveyard in the Rules Committee.
So how?
Why we're a little more optimistic, John, is because he did create this new committee. It's the first time ever they've had a campaign finance committee.
All right.
And Jeff Golden as the champion of campaign finance reform. We're a little more optimistic. We're all cautiously optimistic, but we're a little more optimistic that this could pass through, especially now that the spotlight's on this issue across the state. So.
All right, good. Well, I'm glad you guys are aware. I really hope that this happens, because you got two foxes in the hen house with your committee. So.
Oh yeah, and others too.
Very true. Thank you for that work. That's encouraging.
Thank you.
So what can people do to help support this?
Well, if they could get a hold of me, because when it gets down to the vote and to pressuring these different party leaders, they could get a hold of me directly. My cell phone is always on, 541-580-9120. We could figure out which district they live in and how that could help put pressure in Salem. Or they can email me at patrickstarnes@live.com, and that's STARNES@live.com. And I'll plug them into how they can help, because it's all volunteer effort. There's no paid lobbyists for this. We have a whole bunch of young people helping from across, the state, getting involved, and it's pretty exciting. Because what's fun, Larry, is when I go to these different staff members in these offices, it's basically anybody under 30 gets it immediately. The staff members get it no matter which side of the aisle they're on. Everyone's ready to get the big money out of politics, but there are just all these old institutions and all these, like you were just describing, blocking challengers to incumbents, and just like the DNC dilemma with Bernie and Hillary. So, I mean, this is a huge institution, and it's going to take some grassroots effort to change it.
You have a Labor Day designated for this? I mean, not a Labor Day, a lobbying day in the Salem?
Well, just personally, I go every Wednesday because the Campaign Finance Committee in the Senate meets at 3:00 on every Wednesday with Jeff Golden as the chair. And I recommend folks watch that. The very first one, the governor came and supported the effort. She's made that promise, and she's put it in her budget, and she's keeping it on the agenda. Some of the challenges that you'll see coming up are when you have a big issue like the carbon battle with climate change. or the healthcare battle that we're going to see this session, or even the education funding battle, some of these bigger issues can sort of suck all the oxygen out of the air for campaign finance reform. And that's why I'm trying to get it through early before the bigger battles come. And we all recognize that this is the first and primary issue of all those other battles. If you want to stop the LNG, you got to get the big fossil fuel money out of Salem. If you want to have a single payer healthcare, you have to get the big pharmaceutical insurance money out of Salem. Otherwise, these other reforms that we support will not happen until we get the big money out of politics.
Yep. Betsy, do we have any questions from the line?
Kevin Cronin asked if Patrick supports the Senate Joint Resolution 13.
Well, I'm holding. I do. I support either of the resolutions, but I'm not sure which one will prevail. So we're just going to wait and see which one rises to the top and has the most legs. The governor's team is working with their lawyers to decide what they're going to support, and they expect that the middle of February they'll be finished with all that research they're doing on her initiatives, and that'll tip the scales one way or the other. Hope that answered Kevin's question.
Yeah, that's all the questions.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on this morning and giving us an update. I hope everyone can get behind this because, as you said, this is the linchpin that will set us free from all the bad money coming in and preventing good progressive legislation from going forward.
I should add something as well, Larry, if I have a little more time.
Sure.
Parallel to this constitutional amendment and getting limits on contributions, we also have to deal with independent expenditures that come outside of a candidate, and it's called dark money. So parallel to this effort, we also need rules that'll put a light on that dark money, because with Citizens United, we can't limit that outside money, but hopefully with our rules changes, we can at least make it not dark and have it paid for by rules and other transparency efforts that'll put more light on that supposed dark money.
Would that be taken care of in the ballot initiative that we will see in 2020, or will that be a separate effort?
It'll be a separate effort and follow Dan Rayfield's effort. He's got some resolutions he's working to have on this agenda as well. So it's not just one thing. There's also a big effort to do a small donor match, which Portland just passed in the city elections, and other cities have passed that, like Seattle and New York. That's where if you volunteer as a candidate to limit your donations, those small donations that you gather can be matched. It's like public financing of elections. So that effort, Common Cause is the big champion of that. And that'll be on this year's session as well. It came last in 2017, it was on, but it didn't get enough support. So these are a variety of issues that we're trying to get to the forefront, besides the constitutional amendment, which is crucial to pass the limits.
So much work. Thank you. Thank you so much for pursuing this.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, and I look forward to giving you an update in a couple of weeks.
Okay, we'll look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Our final segment is an update on the national popular vote legislation. This was something that rose to the forefront 2 years ago in the legislature. And if you don't know the background on this one, we've now elected two presidents who did not receive the national popular vote. The first one was in 2000, where we got George Bush, and the second one was in 2016, where we got Donald Trump. And the national popular vote legislation would take care of that. And what it is an agreement amongst the states that they would cast their electoral votes to whomever receives the majority of the national popular vote. And it's perfectly constitutional. It's rock solid. It's been examined from all perspectives. And if we could just get the final states to pass this, we would have it in place. This is I believe, the 6th time that the legislation has come up before the Oregon House of Representatives. They've always been great, and we expect them to pass the bill. Where it has always gotten hung up is in the Oregon Senate, in the Rules Committee, where we were just talking about in the previous topic, chaired by a senator who will be up for election in 2020. There's 2 bills out there right now. There's one bill that's sponsored by Representative Clem. It doesn't seem to be the primary bill that is getting all the emphasis. The bill that is in the House that has all the support is House Bill 2704, titled Relating to the Agreement Among the States to Elect the President by National Popular Vote. There are currently 16 representatives that are sponsoring it. So Dan Rayfield, Paul Evans, Rob Noss, Jennifer Williamson, Alyssa Kinney-Geyer, Julie Fahey, Sarah Gelser, Diego Hernandez, Tanya Sanchez, Elizabeth Steiner Hayward, Tiffany Mitchell, Susan McLean, Marshall Wild, and Kathleen Taylor have all signed on to this. There's another legislative concept that's being sponsored by Senator Dembro, and I heard that he's leaving it in the concept stage, because if you don't formalize it as a Senate bill, you can still pick up sponsors from the House. And so he's looking for more sponsors just to demonstrate greater support for it. And then he would move forward with that one. And then you'd have those 2 bills, which would somehow be reconciled and hopefully actually brought to a vote before the session ends. So right now, 12 senators have signed on as sponsors of the legislative concept, which is huge because there's only 30 senators in total. And they do a lot of work to demonstrate that it's bipartisan, because the president of the Senate likes to see bipartisanship in bills that get brought to the floor. The trick is getting it out of committee and to the floor where it could be voted upon. Even if it loses, at least that would show us who truly supports the bill and should be reelected, and who does not, who we really need to find a opponent for when they come up next. So that's what's going on with the national popular vote in Oregon. The state nationwide, the good news is that the legislation passed the Colorado Senate on January 29th. And now the bill goes to the Colorado House of Representatives. So far, 11 states have passed it. And it looks like Colorado and possibly Oregon could be number 12 and 13, which gets us really, really close to the magic number of 271 votes. What you can do is please contact your state senator, regardless of their political affiliation. So even if you're in Eastern Oregon, where your senators tend to be Republicans, call them and urge them to support the bill. But majority vote is such a fundamental concept to a democracy and parliamentary procedure. It's only because of the negotiations that they had to do when they wrote the Constitution that we were in this situation in the first place. Also, encourage them to pass the bill instead of refer it to the voters. That is something that Senator Burdick has said that she wants to do, and we really don't want this to be a multi-million-dollar ballot fight, because what will happen if this is referred to the voters is that it will not be a decision made by Oregonians, but it'll be there will be massive amounts of outside money coming into the state, just like we've seen on other controversial ones, and we think that it would have a risk of failing, where we would really like our legislators to do their job and do the right thing. Any questions on national popular vote, Betsy?
Nope.
Well, that's it for our show today. We do have some upcoming events that you need to be aware of. February 9th is the 4th CD election of members of the standing committees in the Democratic Party of Oregon. Their meeting is at the Florence Senior Center in Florence, Oregon, over on the coast. So if you are a SCC delegate or a CD delegate and you haven't received your information on them, you should contact your CD chair or the DPO and find out what's going on. I found out the details of this on the events calendar on the DPO website, which is www.dpo.org. The February 11th is the first day to file for local elections. So for all those candidates that you've been finding to run for health districts and port commissions in your county, that'll be the first day for them to file. February 16th is the first CD election. That'll be in Hillsboro at the Coyote Bar and Grill. So we'll have a fun time there. On March 3rd will be the third CD election, and that will be somewhere in Portland. And that will take care of 4 of the 5. The 5th one will be the second CD, which is the whole eastern half of the state. And we expect them to have elect their committee members the morning of March 17th, because it's so difficult for them to get together face to face otherwise. March 21st, so March 17th is the Democratic Party of Oregon reorganization meeting. That's where we will be electing our new chair and new vice chairs, possibly, and the secretary. The current chair has announced that she will not be running for re-election. We don't have solid information on anyone who's filed. We have a lot of people who have indicated their intention to run, so I'm not even going to mention who they are. The Democratic Party of Oregon is refusing to release the names of who's running for these offices, which is very weird. Here in Clatsop County, you can find out who's signed up to run for dog catcher from the county website. It seems to be something that you should do in a transparent and open election, but the leadership of the Democratic Party of Oregon doesn't see so. And so if I get back on the Rules Committee, I will be proposing that as one of the rules that we institute, so we don't have to sit around and find out on February 21st that we didn't do a good enough job and that we have someone who's totally inappropriate running for election in the Democratic Party. March 21st is the last day to file for the local elections, and then March 25th is the due date for voter pamphlet statements. You saw Patrick talk about the importance of how that played in his nomination from the Independent Party. 2 of the candidates didn't get their voter pamphlet statements in, and he did, and he won. Typically, that's what you find because the voter's pamphlet is a key source of information for voters. So make sure that you have your language done and your picture taken so you can submit it on time. The worst story to hear is when someone couldn't navigate some stupid online process and they missed the deadline, and the deadline seems to be very inflexible. So target a day or 2 in advance in case you have some hiccups, just to make sure that you get your information in. There is no benefit to turning it in at the last moment. April 30th is the voter registration date. May 1st is the day that the ballots will be mailed, and then May 21st is the 2019 local elections. That's it for upcoming events. If you want to get involved, again, go to advancementofdemocracy.org and hit the join button. We would love to have your participation. We need representation all across the state. We have them predominantly on the western half, and we do have fairly good representation up and down the coast, but we do need more people along the gorge and certainly in Eastern Oregon, and we would love to have you join us. And of course, if you would like to donate to Uphill Media, we do need, we use the Bernie model of contributions, and we would appreciate anything that you could give us to help keep our equipment running and the lights on so John doesn't, and the heat on so John doesn't freeze. Is there anything you'd like to add, John?
No, good coverage. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you all for joining us today. Do we have a song that we're going out with?
Of course. We're just going out with Tony Tiggs, Feel the Burn, because, you know, he should be announcing here real soon, I think. So, got to get ready for that, everybody. Anyway, good job, Larry. Good show, Betsy. Thank you all. Patrick was wonderful. And thank you, audience.
A nation in which the wealthiest people are becoming phenomenally rich, while we have over 40 million people living in poverty. The very least that we can say is that nobody in America goes,
the Pied Piper Bernie Sanders for the middle class. What a GOP wants to put our interests last. He's gonna give it to you raw, no hesitation. With the right ideas to lead this great nation. No handouts, no special interest groups. He don't lie to give votes, he's telling you the truth. And while the media wants to downplay him, he's still gonna fight. Tell him all he ain't playing. Push him for higher wages so we all can feed our families. The only one I know who can conquer this insanity of this Wall Street bickering, belittling the poor. Dollar bills, only thing they considering. When people need health care, kids need school. When it comes to politics, Bernie's breaking rules. No attack gets on the competition's needed. He's running on the facts and it's something that we needed. Feel the burn, make him feel the burn. All the way to the White House, feel the burn. Feel the burn, make him feel the burn. Till the haters on the right, they can feel the burn. Feel the burn, make him feel the burn. All the way to the White House, feel the burn. Feel the burn, make him feel the burn. Till the haters on the left, they can feel the burn. You see him scared shook, he's a democratic socialist, but they don't even know what it means, they just roll with it. Get over it, check the resume, fighting for civil rights ever since the first day. While other candidates still with their hands out, we do it old school, grassroots stand out. Cause this is our time to have a voice heard. You fat cats had your chance, now it's our turn. They say he can't win, he's too liberal, way too extreme, too honest and too cynical. They want another robot politician, the same old rhetoric, now they gon' listen. Feel the burn, make them feel the burn. All the way to the White House, feel the burn. Feel the burn, make them feel the burn. Till the haters on the right, they can feel the burn. Feel the burn, make them feel the burn. All the way to the White House, feel the burn. Feel the burn, make them feel the burn. Till the haters on the left, they can feel the burn.
Millions and millions of working people who are working hard but are not making enough money to put bread on the table or to take care of their kids, and that has got to end. The time has come when people all over this country create a political movement which says to the billionaire class, you can't have it all.
Feel the burn, make them feel the burn. All the way to the White House, feel the burn. Feel the burn, make them feel the burn. Till the haters on the right, they can feel the burn. Feel the burn, make them feel the burn. All the way to the White House, feel the burn. Feel the burn, make them feel the burn. Till the haters on the left, they can feel the burn.